We're very excited today on the podcast to welcome J.M. Snyder, who's both an author and a publisher, and I'm happy to say is my publisher for the Hat Trick series, along with some other stories of mine. Welcome, J.M.
Hello.
So for our audience who may not be familiar, if you could introduce yourself both as an author and a publisher, that would be great.
Okay. My name is J.M. Snyder, obviously, and I have been publishing erotic romance and romance since around 2000. I started self-publishing and then began e-publishing with the now defunct Aspen Mountain Press. And then I moved into e-publishing with Amber Quill, and I worked with other publishers like Torquay and a few others. And in 2010, I was speaking with a friend of mine who was not publishing with a publisher. He was writing free fiction online, publishing it on Nifty and such. And he wanted to get into publishing. And I, at that point, had some books that were coming out of contract. And none of the publishers who I was working with were taking reprints at the time. And we decided to start our own press. Or rather, he encouraged me to start my own press because he didn't want to get on the hook for it. So I started JMS Books and began publishing. At first, it was invite only, and it was very small, and it's still very small. But we opened it up to submissions, and we've done pretty well. In 2011, I quit my day job to go publishing and writing full time. Unfortunately, I don't write as much as I'd like, but the publishing takes over. I also write lesbian fiction under the name J.T. Marie, and I write gay YA fiction under the name J. Thomas. I've also branched into MMF fiction under Shauna Jean. I've found that if you write different genres, you should probably write under different pseudonyms, because not everybody who reads one type of story by you wants to read all of the other types of stories by you, which I understand. So I do write under different names, and I don't make it a secret. So, but now if you didn't know that, you know. So in a nutshell, that's me.
I didn't know about the MMF pen name. That was a new one for me.
Well, it's not, I have not written very much under it, I will admit. And most of it's very, very short, because it's sort of an experiment. But if there's like 5 books, 5 stories, and I think the longest is if it's 24,000 words, it's not very long. So it's a little harder to get it to write 3 different characters all in a scene at one time for me. My mind doesn't work that way, but it's interesting. It's different.
It's a lot of pronouns.
It is a lot of pronouns. At least it's not all the same pronoun.
True.
But I guess if I ever wrote, and I've written MMM before, and I tend to do that with a first person only, so I don't have he and he and he. But it's keeping everybody straight in the act. It's like, whoa, I don't know where. It's almost like playing what's that word? The game where you have Twister. That's what it's like. I just picture it as Twister on a bed, but yeah. I mean, it's fun, but it's different. Very different.
It is Valentine's week, and with that, you're putting out the Love Wins series.
Yes.
Starting this week.
Well, actually,
tell us a little bit about that series.
We started the week before. The first ones come out the week of February. Is it February 4th? Is that the Sunday?
February 7th is the Sunday, and then we come out on the 8th.
Yes, it's but the first. Okay, February 7th. I was thinking February 1st was. I get confused on the Sundays, just because January has to end on a Sunday. But it's the Love Wins series. We decided to come up with this after the Supreme Court decision that approved gay marriage, or legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. And we thought it would be nice to do a series of stories that had a celebratory tone to it. We wanted a contemporary series that celebrated gay marriage after legalization. They aren't all the stories are not set in America because other countries have legalized it earlier. We do have one that is set in the UK. I want to say it's set in Ireland, but I'm not quite sure. But so we do have some that are not set in America, but they are set in other parts of the world that have it legalized prior to the Supreme Court ruling. And I wanted it to be not only MM, because we do have some FF authors who do have their own following. So we have 4 that are FF stories and the rest are MM. We are releasing 4 a week, and there's 4 weeks in February. So that would be 16 stories. I will admit at this point, they're not all up on the site yet because not everybody has turned in their blurbs, but that's the hardest thing I think most people find when writing a book is the blurbs. But I know I have issues writing blurbs myself. Trying to get a 20 or 30K story down to 200 words is very difficult to do. But I feel your pain if that is your problem writing blurbs, because I have the same issue.
Blurbs are awful, and Will can attest to that because he helps me with my blurbs.
Blurbs are really bad. Now, the funny thing is that some distributors require shorter blurbs and longer blurbs. The shorter blurbs, once you've written the longer blurbs, are super easy to do. I can truncate 200 words down to 140 characters. I can't do it the opposite way. But yeah, blurbs are the bane of all writers. They're horrible. But they have to come to me all at once. Usually much later after I've finished the story. So, but no, the Love Wins series, hopefully readers will appreciate them. Some authors, we have actually several authors. We have you, and we have Tinian, who is they're revisiting characters who they've written in the past. My story also revisits characters from an earlier story. Drew Hunt's story does the same thing. I hope that readers will like that, because these are characters that they've seen in other stories and hopefully have grown to love, or at least wanted to know more about and wanted to see in a relationship or in a progression of their relationship that they did not have a chance to in the other story. But so we have at least 4 of those stories that will be a continuation or a revisitation of earlier works.
And hopefully, for people who might be new, that actually provides the entree into the series that those characters spun off from.
True, because those stories do, I think, stand on their own. I mean, like yours are it's a completely different story from the Hat Trick series. Like you can read the Leo and Matt story without having read Simon and Alex's. So you don't have to go in and go, oh, well, I've not read Hat Trick, so I can't read this. Whereas some stories you can't do that with. And Drew's Calvin and Brock, you don't have to go back and read his Calvin's Cowboy story to know who these characters are. He sort of reintroduces them early on. And my story, which it revisits my characters from It's All Relative, takes place 11 years after the fact, because it's been 11 years since I wrote that first story. So I sort of reintroduced them as well. You don't have to have read the first story where Michael came out to his family and introduced his army boyfriend. And now, it's Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been repealed, and gay marriage is now legalized. And so his boyfriend, now lover, is in the military, openly in a relationship with a gay man, and is going to propose marriage to him. You don't have to have read the other story, which is about Michael's dead aunt. So it would help. Those who have read them before are like, oh, finally we get to see these other characters, but you don't have to have read them. But when you do, you can go, oh, I want to know more, and you can pick up all of the 3 Hat Trick series, and then the 4, and then the free ones. Because there is the one that's not free, the overtime that's not free.
Now, JM, the Love Wins series is it's a series of stories, correct? It's not like an anthology.
No, they're individual stories because some of them I gave the authors leeway as to the length. And some of them are around 12 to 20K, and some of them are 20 to 30K, and some of them are a little over. So it's, if I put them in an anthology, it would be super, super long. We did a multi-author series over the summer called Heatwave last summer, and it was under the same criteria. And the books that came in, if we had put them all in an anthology, it would end up like 200,000 words. It would just be a ginormous book. It would be used as a doorstop. It would look like something Stephen King had put out. So yeah, it could be used as a weapon. And the Love Wins would be the same. Also, I have found that our readers don't necessarily, the ones who read the gay stories don't necessarily read the lesbian stories. So if we put out an anthology of the whole collection, I don't think that the lesbian stories would get the fair share of the readers, or people wouldn't necessarily pick them up because of the lesbian stories in the same book. They also have a different cover, obviously, to indicate which ones have the women in them and which ones have the men in them. Now, that's not to say that in the future we may do an anthology collecting some of them together and some of the, the ones that fit better together in a print collection. However, print sales, I will admit, are not all that they're cracked up to be. A lot of people who want print seem to be the authors. Readers seem to prefer ebooks at this point. Well, ebooks are cheaper, quicker. I mean, you can, if you decide you want to read a book, open up your Kindle or your phone and download it immediately. You don't have to wait for Amazon to ship it to you. So
yeah, I think what I've found at going to conventions is that readers will get buy the books of the authors that love the best in paperback.
Yeah.
Or will get a book on paperback that they've already read and know that they love it, and then put it in their paperback collection.
Exactly. I mean, I have books in my library. I mean, I have a ton of books because I tend to buy books, but I have books that I will never part with because I love them. I read them all the time. These are the books that I read all the time. And then I have books that I've bought because they're on clearance, or, they were at library sales and, oh yeah, this looks interesting. And then when I read it, or if I didn't like it, I pass it on. But for the most part, when I buy a book, I buy an ebook because it's cheaper. I mean, it's just the fact. Nowadays, it's easier to read ebooks. They're cheaper and they're quicker. So, plus I have a Kindle and I can hold 4 billion of them. Whereas, if you go to Panera to read and you want to read the new Harry Potter, or it's not new anymore, but you want to read Harry Potter, you can lug something that's like super, super, super thick, or you can take your Kindle and have all 7 at your hands. It's a easier thing to read ebooks. I think also with romance in particular, and fiction as well, with people who are not, I don't want to really say closeted, but some people are still closeted about it, but people who don't want to admit that this is what they read, particularly romance, but also gay fiction, and I'm not just talking about people who are scared to admit this is what they read, but people who don't want to admit to, say, their husbands that this is how much they read. They can download it and nobody has to know. They've got 15 books they bought this week because there's no stack in the corner, and they don't have to hear, oh, when are you going to read all these? Well, you have no clue how much I have. 4 million books. You don't see the credit card statements, thank goodness. But so they can hide their addiction a little bit better this time.
So when you're selecting books for JMS Books, what do you look for? What's the trademark of a JMS book that you could tell a reader, this is what you'll find when you buy a book from me?
Well, early on, we had a broader scope. When I first started, publishing company, we were sort of open to anything that was LGBT and anything that was like genre specific that I was interested in. Like I like sci-fi, so we published some sci-fi stuff that was not LGBT. We published some mystery thriller. We dabbled in everything. And then as we went on, because this year is our 6th year in business, as time went on, I realized what we could and could not market, what worked for us, what worked for our readers, what people liked from us, what people were looking for. And so we've honed that down, and we continue to hone that down. And I think that you have to do that in order to stay relevant to the business. You have to know what works for not only your authors, but also for your readers. Because I've always heard as a author, oh, well, the readers stay with the publisher. And I never really understood that. But I think that that's true. I think that we have a set number of readers who like our books and who will take a chance on new writers who publish with us as long as we give them the type of books we've published in the past. So starting in about 2014 and on, we were very specific in honing our guidelines so that we were looking for what works for us are very romantic stories. Happy ever after or happy for now. That is a viable ending. The ones that do best for us don't necessarily have to have erotic content in them, but when they do, they have to be very steeped in romance. I think a lot of people send us submissions that they think are gay fiction, that are not fiction. I think that a lot of authors don't understand the concept or the difference between the two, and that if you're going to submit to JMS Books, you really need to do your research in what we've published recently. I tell a lot of authors who send us multiple submissions that we turn down, I say, look at our bestseller list, which I publish on our site under quarterly bestsellers. Look and see what sells for us, because that's where that's the sort of stuff we're looking for. Just because these are the stories that are doing well. These are the stories that we like. These are the ones that that our readers like. These are the types of stuff we're looking for. We're looking for really loving relationships. They don't have to necessarily start out that way, but they have to end that way. We don't necessarily take a lot of BDSM. We have in the past, but people don't really tend to like that from us. Contemporary sells better for us than other genres. I don't know why that is. I know some publishers do really well with historicals, but we don't really tend to. We have tried paranormal. Some paranormal works better than others. So it's really on a case-by-case basis with that. But when I say paranormal, shifters sell better than vampires, I guess, but everybody's over vampires at this point. Thank you, Twilight. So I don't understand why you would like one over the other. I would think if you like paranormal, you'd like it all, but what do I know? Lesbian is not as big a seller for us. I am always hesitant to take some lesbian stories because I feel I'm always conflicted as a publisher, because I always see it as a publisher and as an author myself. And as an author, I always feel like you should do your best to reach your best audience as an author. So I know everyone always thinks that of me as a publisher, but I always want to also say, as a publisher, yes, this is a good story. But as an author, are you reaching your best audience? Should you not maybe also try a lesbian-centric publisher? I don't want you to limit yourself to a audience that is mostly interested in fiction. And I don't know if that is always the best thing to do, maybe not, but I don't want you to just send us a lesbian story without considering your other options. Because some of them sell really well for us off the charts. Lesbian romance does very well. Lesbian erotica, not so much. Lesbian erotic romance that's contemporary does well, but if there's other like if the gist of it is anything other than the romance, not so much. And YA seems to have, I don't know about the YA market at the moment. It seems to have lost. Well, we were doing real well with YA for a little bit, but it seems like YA is not as profitable to the authors as it used to be. We've increased our word count minimum because the shorter stories were not selling well for our authors. And I think a lot of readers want longer stories in YA, which I can understand because I myself like longer stories. And I think that the YA genre is inundated with longer stories. And by longer stories, I mean like trilogies. I mean, look at the Hunger Games and, I mean, Harry Potter. How much longer can you get? So I think that the younger readers really want characters that they can invest in. And short stories are not that. And there is such a dearth of queer characters in YA that I think that it would behoove us to really give them something of length that they could connect with. Unfortunately, we're just not seeing that too much. I do like stories like Hat Trick where they can grow with the characters. I think that's perfect because obviously younger readers, and this is a very difficult thing for people who write YA to understand, is younger readers always read older than they are. When I was younger, I read Stephen King because there was very little for us to read at that age. Now you've got 50 million things to read. There's a huge YA genre, but when you're 13, you're not reading books for 13-year-olds. You're reading books for 16-year-olds. You're reading books for 17-year-olds. So if you want to write for a 13-year-old, it's very difficult to do. You have to write older than the age that you're targeting because that's what they're reading. Nobody wants to hear that, but
yeah.
Just
going back to the gay fiction thing real quick. As a publisher, what is the difference to you between MM fiction and gay fiction? Is it just the romance quotient? Or?
Well, I think that romance is very strong in MM as opposed to gay fiction. We've gotten a lot of gay fiction submissions that are very well written, but they don't have, they're literary stories. There's not anything in there that is erotic or romance, or it's very autobiographical, almost like a memoir. And it's not. It's fiction, but it reads like a memoir. And we've tried that as well, publishing that in the past, and it does not work for us. Okay. That's not to say that it isn't a valid literary genre and that it doesn't work well for other publishers. And when we do get submissions of that ilk, I'm probably different from other publishers in that I will make an attempt to tell an author, this is a very good story. It's not right for us, but here are some publishers who may be good for you. I know some publishers don't do that. Some publishers are like, sorry, it's not good for us. Thanks. I don't think that that's fair to an author whose book or story is written well. I think that it can be very discouraging when you don't know where else to try. So I do make an attempt to say, have you looked at this press or have you looked at this press? Because I know that it may be difficult for you when you're a writer and you're searching for presses or publishers, and they don't differentiate, and they're like, oh, these are gay publishers, and they list everybody, and you don't know the difference between X, Y, and Z. So you're just sending them out, and nobody is telling you why they're turning your story down. So I try, if your story, I try to give a little bit of guidance to that sometimes, if I have a chance.
If you had to put JMS into sort of a niche. Would you consider yourself, do you call yourself a small publisher?
I call myself a micro publisher. A small press is usually, they say it's like 1 to 50 employees. I think that's disingenuous. I think a lot of small presses, I mean, what we think of as small press is, I mean, because what we think of as traditional is an unfortunate term, because we're all traditional publishers in that we are not vanity presses. You know, we're not asking authors to pay us to publish them. Small press is usually a smaller venue, and I guess I would fall into that term. And almost all of the e-publishers I can think of would be considered small press. They're not any of the big six in New York. However, I consider myself much, 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 much smaller than, say, Lucid or Torqueray or Dreamspinner or any of the others, in that I don't have a staff under me. I don't have the, you know, the investors. I don't have staff. I don't have anyone other than myself.
Mm-hmm. Meaning that you contract out things like editors and things like that?
Yes, I contract editing.
Okay.
So what's coming up this year for the imprint?
Well, other than the Love Wins, I will admit that I don't plan too far ahead in much of anything, which is unfortunate. I mean, in any part of my life, I don't plan much ahead. Yeah, I've been told that's not a good thing, but hey, I've gotten this far. So I tend to not like to plan too far ahead anyway, because I get nervous when there's too much that far ahead. But we have the Love Wins in February, and we do have several submission calls out there. I've found that in the past, when we've had submission calls, the unfortunate thing is a lot of authors write to submission calls and don't submit until the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guilty of that myself, particularly when it, like anthologies and such. I will be the one who, oh, this is a great anthology. I have an idea, and I will write to it and submit it at the 11th hour. So with that in mind, we've decided to start putting out submission calls that are on a rolling basis that are due every month. So in March, for instance, we have or in the end of February, we have a submission call for short stories that are called Men at Work. And it's basically men who find love on the job. That's been a theme that has worked well for me in the past. And there are stories under 10K, which is a good starting point for authors who are not familiar with us or who are not working with us yet, who might want to get their feet wet or try us out. They don't have to commit to much. They can just send us a short story and see if they like working with us, earn a little bit of money with us, and then get in the door and maybe want to submit something longer later on down the line. Then we have a submission call that ends at the end of March that is an Alpha Omega call, which is, from what I've been explained, because it is not one I came up with. It was one Drew came up with, and he apparently likes the genre. It doesn't have to be werewolves, but it can be werewolves. But we have a book that we published this month called First Omega that was very popular. It was actually hit #1 on all romance ebooks for several weeks, which was quite surprising. And we've never had a book hit that high on such a large website. So that was interesting. So we have that submission call. It's for slightly longer stories. That's going to be due at the end of March. And then we have some that are rolling calls. It just means that as the stories come in, we'll schedule them for release. There's 3 of those. And we picked those themes based on what does well in the market, what we think that readers like. One is for single, or not necessarily single, but gay fathers who find love. That's a theme that apparently my readers tend to like. which is odd since I don't have children. Apparently, I write them very well. But my brother has 5, so I guess that's where I get a lot of my ideas from. And then, similar to that, men who are drawn together over their love of animals. And then Backup Buddies, which is about partners who find love. Partners being, like cops or firemen or men who work together who find their relationship on the workforce or takes them further together, takes a deeper meaning outside of the workplace. That's what we're doing at the moment. I was thinking of doing something in July, which is our anniversary month, but I haven't really hammered that out yet. But I guess I better soon. But I don't know. I was thinking of doing like an anniversary themed stories. I don't know if that would be much of interest to anybody, but
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the business side of
Sure.
JMS Press. Now, 2015 seemed to be kind of a rough year for small presses and authors who have independently published, especially the latter half of 2015. Sales seem to be pretty rough for a whole lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering how you as a small press sort of weathered the storm of 2015 and how you are pivoting and trying to improve some of the problems that you may have encountered last year.
Well,
coming 2016.
I will tell you, I'll be upfront. I mean, I've always been upfront when people ask me about when I was self-publishing. I was always upfront about sales and everything. And I will tell you that the main reason why, at first I thought that it was the multi-author series that we had done in July and August that had hurt our sales, because I saw the plummeting. It started around September. And then I started hearing rumblings from other presses and independent authors about their sales. So I realized it wasn't just me. And I did a little bit more research, and the bulk of the problem stemmed from a sudden drop in sales through Amazon, which was always our largest distributor. And doing more research, because I keep extensive records going all the way back to like 2000. So I keep extensive records of sales on every title I've ever published. And the problem stems from Amazon's change. I'll just tell it like it is. Amazon's change in the way their Kindle Unlimited program is run.
Mm-hmm.
They changed from the books. Originally, Kindle Unlimited is a program, for anyone who doesn't know, where readers can pay $10 a month and read as many books as they want. And authors who opt into the program must give Amazon the exclusive right to publish their books through only Amazon. They can't publish them anywhere else. And those books, the authors have to sell only through Kindle. And Kindle Unlimited readers can borrow the books, as many as they want, for free. Authors were paid per book for however many were read. Then in July, they changed it to pages read. So if your book was borrowed in the program and your book was 300 pages and it was only read up to page 20, you were only paid for 20 pages read. Prior to this, authors were publishing basically chapters as a book, and they were getting paid for, 20 chapters as 20 books. And now it didn't behoove them to do that. After July's royalties were paid in September, because Amazon pays 2 months in arrears, everyone realized that the price per page read was less than half a cent. So this was the large shakeup. it also does not help things that Amazon is the only distributor that, as a rule, allows a reader to return an ebook within 7 days of purchase, which means that anybody in the entire world can read your ebook within 7 days of purchase and then return it for a full refund. Don't even get me started on that. So you see in the September royalties, you started seeing a lot of returns because people were taking advantage of that. They were borrowing ebooks as if your book was part of the Kindle Unlimited program, reading it and returning it for a full refund. From what I hear on the word on the street is that Amazon is cracking down on people who do have too many returns. I don't know how true that is, but they are canceling accounts for it. Don't take me at my word. That's just what I've heard. However, this practice has hurt a lot of people. Some publishers, such as Amber Quill, are closing because they can't combat with such practices. And I am a huge fan of Amber Quill. They were one of my first publishers. I love them more than any other publisher I ever worked with. And it hurt me a lot when I heard that they were closing. So that's a huge loss for our community because, I mean, I thought that they were a great publisher. And sales are down all over. Our Smashwords quarterly sales for the last quarter of the year are down almost $1,000. Sales all over Amazon were down for the last 6 months of last year and are only now starting to rebound. Mm-hmm. And overall sales were down. And I don't know if that meant readers were just not reading as much or what, but it seemed as if one distributor who owns, unfortunately, the lion's share of ebooks was screwing us all over royally. So that, I think, was where the state of things stood at the end of 2015. In order to combat that, I think that there has to be a shift in the way we do business. Obviously, we can all rail and cry and complain, but you can't really stand up to Big Brother when Big Brother owns so much of the percentage of, the real estate. So you either have to play ball with the big guys or you have to go home. And if you go home, then unfortunately they win. So by the end of November, I realized I had to do something in order to continue to make the business profitable. And not just JMS Books, but in order to continue to make, money to pay my rent. Because there's also, JMS Books as my publishing company, but also JM Snyder, author. Because if you remember, I quit my day job in 2011, and this is what I do full time. So one of the things I did in December was I finally realized that you have to start meeting Amazon halfway. You can't just ignore the fact that Kindle Unlimited is obviously a large player in this deal. So a lot of my books that I published in 2010 when I started the company were previously published either through Amber Quill, because I had left them when I started JMS Books, or Aspen Mountain or other presses that I then left when I started my own company. So what I did was I pulled a lot of those completely from every venue except Amazon, and I made them Kindle Unlimited titles just to see how that would work. And apparently the page reads do add up. I earned an extra $800 that month through that. So I will admit Kindle Unlimited does have its benefits. At least it paid my rent. Or will whenever I get the money. Because they do pay 2 months in arrears. So February's rent is paid. Yeah. And then some of the books that we have that are older that are coming out of contract because they're not making any money. I've contacted our authors and I'm like, look, this is the deal. Your books have been with us for several years. You're not making any money off of them. We're not making any money off of them. Do you want to try this as a viable option? do you want to go Kindle Select? And I laid out the program, and we've had a few authors who've done that. And so 2 titles in particular we've gone Kindle Select with. And so we'll put them up for free, because you get 5 days with Kindle Select free to tell people these are out there. And one of them has been read. And now obviously this only really works with longer stories. You get the benefit of them. And I've only really done this with the older stories because I get the feeling everybody's already read them. But I don't know how true that is, but they've been out there long enough. And then
well, don't you think with older stories there's sort of a life cycle? I mean, once you release a book and a certain number of fans and readers, they read it and then the sales fall off. But don't you think sometimes after a couple of years you can maybe reintroduce that same book to a new group of readers?
You can, and some stories you do that works very well with. But I'm talking like really short stories I have, and anthologies that I never released as ebook format.
Yeah.
So what I did was I took all my short stories that were very older short stories, like 2010 and beyond, short stories, and they were already in anthologies that were print only. So what I did was put them into Kindle Unlimited as short stories, and then put them into box sets that were Kindle Unlimited short story anthologies box sets. Then I made some box sets now these are not on Kindle Unlimited, but they're just box sets of stories that are published through JMS Books, like Hat Trick series. And because Amazon readers like box sets, and it's already sold 6 copies. So they tend to like to buy in bulk, I guess. They like to buy everything all at once. For instance, with the Kindle Unlimited, I took I have a superhero series called Vic and Matt, and it's been dwindling for a while, mostly because I haven't been writing any stories in it. But I've always thought that it was a good series, and one day I'd get back to it, but you know how that is. And I took all those stories and made them Kindle Select stories, just because I haven't written any in a while. And then I could, once they're Kindle Select, I can put them into different box sets if I want, and try to boost sales. I'm not seeing a lot of sales, but I'm seeing a lot of reads. Granted, that's not huge in the grand scheme of things, but it's something. I think,
like you said, the pages add up eventually.
They do add up. They add up. And then, but I've also, another thing I've done, and this is across the board, is I've lowered our prices. Our prices originally were based off of what I thought at the time, what in 2010 were an aggregate of, at that time, what other publishers were charging. And I had not revisited that since 2010. I did revisit it in December and noticed that a lot of publishers were, publishing more longer stories than shorter. So their base prices were, say, $1.99, $2.99 for stories that started at 15,000 words. And they were not charging more than $5.99 or $6.99 for a novel length book of, say, 70K, 80K. So I revisited our prices and lowered them all by $1. I noticed this helped boost sales of some of our older titles. Once I lowered them, there's a lot of titles to lower across all of our distributors, but and I'm still doing it, but so it's taking time. But I've noticed that has helped sales as well. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I did notice that January we did see a boost. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm exploring, and I don't want anyone to get too excited about this, because I'm still, and when I say exploring, I mean I'm baby steps. I'm exploring audiobooks, and I'm hoping that might be a viable venue. I've released one, but I don't. Their sales dashboard is really confusing. You don't see any sales on it. So, I mean, you see sales, you don't see any figures yet. So, but I've released one. And then the first feedback I get is, why didn't you release a longer one? Because this was the one I could get narrated. I mean, anyway. So, anyway.
What kind of advice would you give to authors to help them, whether they're self-published or working with publishers, to help navigate this new Amazon paradigm?
Well, I would ask if you're self-published, I would say to check out at the Amazon Kindle Select program, because you opt into it, but you only opt into it in 3-month segments. So if you opt into it and you do opt into the Kindle Unlimited program, you can opt into it for as low as 3 months. So after 3 months, you can choose to publish your book widely if you're self-published. So I would say, give it 3 months, see what happens, see if that is a profitable thing for you. Put your book in there for 3 months, promote it for 3 months, give it away free for those 5 days, see how the page reads go, and at the end of 3 months, unselect or unopt out or whatever, or opt out, not unopt out, opt out and publish it widely, publish it on Smashwords, publish it here and there and everywhere else. But give it the 3 months and see if it doesn't help boost your sales a little bit.
Mhm.
With publishers, I'm not sure if any other publisher is doing the Kindle Select Unlimited. I know we don't do it for our authors on, like, normally. I might consider doing it later on. We do have for the love of an Omega submissions call. We're going to try it, the anthology on the Kindle Select, and then we're going to release the stories individually after the 3-month period to see if that's a viable option. Now, granted, we haven't gotten any submissions yet, so I don't know if this is even going to come through. But if it does, we're going to see if that's a viable thing.
Mhm.
Because we can play around with it. I mean, 3 months is not, in the grand scheme of things, a long time. I would say publishing with a smaller publisher who is more willing to work with you on that to see if, hey, can we do it only through Amazon instead of releasing it through all of the other publishing outlets? Can we try that? See if they'll work with you on that. If you do it that way, see if they'll give you a larger cut of the royalties. I mean, like 50-50 at least, because you don't want to work with a publisher who is going to put your book on Kindle Unlimited and then give you only 35%. That's not really a fair deal. But I mean, for that price, you can put it up there yourself, pay someone to do the cover art, and pay an editor. That's just my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, unfortunately, Amazon makes it easy to self-publish. When you work with an author or with a publisher, the publisher should do the editing for you. They should provide you with cover art. They should provide you with the book layout and everything. They should give you something for their cut of the deal. And if you're not getting everything that you want, then you should also, you can go it yourself, but there are options to not. I mean, there are reasons why people choose to publish, and there are reasons why people choose to self-publish.
Mhm.
I understand both, having done both. It is a nightmare sometimes to publish. I understand that. I mean, to self-publish. So make sure that the publisher you work with is someone you like, and you like working with them.
Yeah, I think that's definitely key.
Yeah.
That you've got to like who you're having your business relationship with.
I mean, and that's true in any aspect. It's like you don't go to a doctor you don't like.
Right. I don't know that people necessarily think of that. I think sometimes they're like, oh, well, this publisher's going to take my book. Great, here, have it.
Exactly.
Instead of thinking about the long-term potential long-term aspect of that, because once you sign a contract, you're there for 2, 3, 4 years, depending on the publisher.
Well, exactly. I mean, our contracts are easily dissolved, but there are some that are not, from what I hear. I mean, always read your contract. I'm surprised at the number of people, the number of questions I get that make me aware of the fact that nobody's read their contract. Why do you sign something you haven't read? But anyway, I mean, I read everything.
Even though you and I have done several books together, I still read every contract that comes through just to see if anything shifted.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I will admit that there are probably misspellings sometimes because I cut and paste. But
I don't read them for editing purposes.
Okay, good.
So moving over to J.M. Snyder, author, for a little bit. What's new for you out as an author? You mentioned a Love Wins story. What else has come out?
Well, actually, there are 2 Love Wins stories because I do write a lesbian story for that as well. And that one, the other one, I don't have a title for yet. I'm still fighting with the title. Titles are worse than blurbs for me, I will admit. I'm stuck on the title because it's based on, like I said, the It's All Relative that I had written, and I'm stuck on the relative part, and I can't come up with a title. So that's why it's horrible. Hopefully by the time
it's not on the site yet.
Yes. Hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, I will have come up with a title because I'm stuck on the title. I'm horrible with titles. That's why I have books that are called Vince. I'm like, this is horrible. I'm just going to name it by the name of the character, Vince. Yeah, I'm the worst person with titles and blurbs. But other than that, well, I have a story that it's coming out in April widely, but I've just finished it and I put it on Kindle Unlimited for ahead of time. It's called Not According to Plan, and it has actually gotten a lot of page reads, but not very many downloads. I thought I would try that out to see how that would work. So that's an interesting thing. I thought it would get more downloads, but I figured 3 months is not that long in the grand scheme of things. But I found that I have a stringent writing schedule because I found that if I don't write something and publish it every month, then sales drop. I think that a lot of authors don't realize that. They think that if they write the book, then that's it. Their job is done. But you have to have something out there regularly, whether it's and I'm not talking about a new release, but whether it's a blog or a podcast or something to keep readers interested in you and keep your name out there. You have to keep yourself fresh. And a lot of writers will write a book and sit back like, hey, if you write it, they will come. But that's not always the truth. I mean, if you're Stephen King, yes, maybe. But unfortunately for the rest of us peons, that's not true. So I think that if you had, J.K. Rowling as your marketing PR person, then maybe, yes. But if I don't write something every day, because I can't, unfortunately, blog regularly. I have a blog. I couldn't tell you when I last updated it. It's really a sad blog. Yeah, if I remember to put down when I have a new release, that's a good day. And then sometimes I go, hey, I'm going to have a blog post to talk about how bad a blogger I am. And that's usually the last one for a couple months. Yeah, I'm not a good blogger. But unfortunately, my writing schedule is sort of when I'm done with a story, it's, oh, well, what am I going to write next? Mm-hmm. And then I sit down and I have a list of ideas by my bed, but unfortunately it's been there for a while because usually whatever happens to come up next is what happens to be in my head and not what is written on the piece of paper. But I don't really plan things out. That's back to the not planning. I'm definitely a pantser when it comes to writing.
When it comes to writing, how do you split your time between your professional, your author career and the JMS publishing career? Well, is it a 50-50 or?
Not really. I publish in the morning. Like everything that I do for JMS Books is done in the morning. So if you email me, I will probably respond right away because I'm addicted to email. It's very sad. But if you want something like an attachment done, or everything I do in the morning is publishing related. So like all the books are uploaded for the distributors, all the promotion is done, all of the book files are done, all of the cover art is done in the morning. So between like 8 a.m. and noon, I'm on the computer doing JMS stuff. And then in the evening is when I write. I unfortunately have not set a time to write. I try to do it, but I don't. It never works out. There's always something that comes up. But I usually try to write at least 1,000 words a day. At least. Sometimes I get into a spot where I write more. Sometimes I don't write as much. But I usually write in the evenings. Okay. So it's split that way. I mean, I'd like to say it's 50-50, but it's not really.
Trying to get a book out a month is impressive.
I say a book, but it's sometimes by book I mean ebook, so sometimes it's just a story.
Sure, but it's something.
True. And sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes it's just a short story, and sometimes I miss a month. So I know.
But still, I mean, that's great, as you said, for visibility and just productivity overall. You
have to keep yourself current, even if it's not like I said, if it's not a book, if it's like a podcast is so a new podcast is out every day, a month or a week. How often do you put out?
We're every week.
See, that's impressive too. I mean, that's crazy. How do you do it?
That's what Sundays are for.
Yeah.
Primarily.
That's what we do on Sundays.
That's crazy.
But I don't think I could do that. Author podcast that's daily.
See, that's how could you do that? They're obviously not an author doing it. How would you write?
He discovered early on that a true new episode every day was crazy. So what they'll do is they'll take something that they may have discussed for an hour and slice it into 3 20-minute episodes. So there
you go. Yeah.
But there's still editing time and production time in that. So yeah, we're not as crazy as he is.
Oh my, that is crazy.
So you talked a little bit through this interview about preferred size and length for books, which kind of is a nice connection to our question of the week this week. As a reader, putting aside your author hat, your publisher hat, what's your preferred size or length for books?
Well, this is kind of weird. I mean, I tend to like longer stories, but it's kind of hard for me to start one because they tend to intimidate me, if that makes any sense. Like if I see a book that I've not read before and it's very thick, I'm like, oh God, what if I don't like that? You know, what if it's, you never know.
Yeah.
And so I tend to put them off. And then sometimes you're pleasantly surprised when they're really, really, really good. But I tend to like longer stories just because they really let you get into them. And they really develop the characters and the setting, and you can lose yourself into them. And, 3 days later, your whole life has been uprooted, and you have to come back to the real world, and you're like, this sucks. But if a book is really good, I can lose myself in it. I'd like to write short stories, but I tend to really love to read novels, like long, long, long novels. But right. they do intimidate me sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's by an author that I really love, then, I delve right in. But, I mean, there were 2 that I read in 2014 that both of them I put off for the longest time. I checked them both out from the library, and one of them I kept checking out, like renewing, because I just never bothered to get to start it. And then finally I was like, well, I can't check it out anymore, and I might as well read it. So I finally started it and then could not put it down. And then almost like had to pay a fine for it because I returned it at the 11th hour. But fortunately it was, midnight on New Year's Eve and they were closed. So they were going to be closed the next day. But I was really glad that I did start the book because like I said, once I started it, I could not finish it. I mean, I could not finish it fast enough. It was just awesome. But I put it off because it was so thick, it was intimidating. But I like novels like that.
I think that's one of the nice things about the Kindle, because you don't really necessarily, unless you really paid attention when you bought it, you may not realize how big that book is.
I know, but the problem though is that I am one of those people, and I will admit it up front, that I get very anxious when I'm reading and I have to skip ahead. So, like for instance, last year I read The Martian and I read it on the Kindle. And I don't know if you've read The Martian or seen the movie, but it's a sci-fi. It's a sci-fi story, and not to ruin it for anybody, but the end is very intense. And if I had the novel like in paperback or hardcover, I would have literally skipped to the end to make sure everything came out all right. But as it was, I was reading it on the Kindle, and it was literally 2 a.m. because I could not read it fast enough to find out what happened. Because there's no way I could have skipped to the end and then find, I guess I could have put a bookmark, but I didn't think of it. I was just reading it and thinking, if this does not end the way it's supposed to end, because it says there's like 10% left, I will be so upset. But I just could not read it fast enough. My eyes were burning because it was literally 2 a.m. And I was just like, oh God, next time getting the paperback, definitely.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
No, that Kindle percentage, it can be a harsh mistress.
Yeah, and sometimes it's completely wrong, because I've read, where it says 10% right, and the last 5% is really information about the author. And I was like, really? Yeah. Here I thought I had a lot more left, and there's not.
Yeah,
but
the back matter or an excerpt from a next book, or it's like, no.
Well, no, and it's not even, this is stuff Amazon's put in, like, oh, you might also enjoy. Really? Amazon? You're lying to me. And that's why I don't read mysteries, because I have to know who did it, and I'll flip ahead. I'm horrible. I'm like, I'm just horrible. I have to know who did it, and even in the beginning, and I'll flip to the end of the book, and because otherwise it'll keep me awake, and I can't read that fast. So I don't like mysteries because of that. And if it's a mystery book and I'm reading it and I can guess it, then it's not well written. So. Because I'm not, don't read a lot of mysteries. But yeah.
So now you could turn the table on our listeners. Give them a question of the week for this coming week.
See, now this is hard. Actually, I had one. I should have written it down. Oh, I know what it is. Because I actually read. I get a lot of questions from readers who ask me what my favorite books are, and I think that there are a lot of them are disappointed when they find out that they're not genres that they would be interested in. For instance, my favorite novelist ever, my favorite writer is Stephen King, and a lot of people who read my stories are not interested in that kind of story, or in the kind of stories he writes. So my question would be for your next guest would be, what kind of book or what kind of books do you like to read that you think your readers would not be interested in?
Sort of like what do you read outside of genre?
Yeah, like outside of what you think other people would like. And it might be, maybe your favorite book is 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe you're embarrassed to admit that, but I will admit that I never read that, and I probably never will. I did read a sample once. That was the end of that.
That was the same for me. I read the sample, and I went, okay, I'm done.
Oh my God. Although I will tell you, have you seen the preview for this movie coming out called 50 Shades of Black? You got to look.
I read about that the other day.
Oh my God. I saw it on TV. I about fell out. I was like, I may be the only white girl in that theater, but I'm going to see that movie. That looks hilarious. But it looks really bad. Okay. In a good way. In the way like the whole Medea movies are. I was the only white girl in that theater, but I was on the floor. I was laughing so hard. It was
right. So we will link up to all things JMS Books and JM Snyder in our show notes.
I need to update that website. The JMS Books one is updated. Mine, not so much.
And we thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry if I hemmed and hawed throughout it.
I think it was all really good, so we're very pleased. And happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, well, thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you.